Hey guys, what's going on? It's your boy Media Kaiser here, back again with another challenge video. On today's episode, we'll be jumping right back into part 2 of the second 3 houses run that I've done. That, of course, being beating 3 houses with only Fortress Knights. And no, I'm not going to make that joke again. No other classes are allowed besides from Fortress Knights, because at this point, all my units are already Fortress Knights, so I don't really have to worry about that. This means that I have to be complacent without any more promotions available to me. In this part, unlike the last one, I will keep up an only axe rule, making axes the only weapon available to me for the remainder of the game. I'm doing this run of the Verdant Wind Path with the Golden Deers. No other units besides house members may be used in combat. Literally anything else is free game though, such as Divine Pulses, Gambits, Adjutants, and free battles. And that's the base of the rules, and if there's anything else that I missed along the way, I'll get to it. This part will focus on the beginning of the 5-year time skip till the end of the game, so buckle in those seatbelts because this will not be a cakewalk. If you want more detail or want to see the run in its entirety, make sure to check out part 1, where I tackle the White Clouds portion of the game. And as always, if you haven't done so already, be sure to hit that subscribe button. It helps me out immensely on my road to 1,000 of you beautiful people. Anyways, I'm going to stop shilling now, and let's just start getting right into it with Chapter 13, Reunion at Dawn. As it opens up, Chapter 13 is already a pain in the ass. For this chapter, Claude is unusable by the boundaries of this run. Claude for this point is given his default class, which is a Wyvern Master. He still has the same axes and weapons and everything that I gave him before, however that is not good enough for me because it would just break the rules, so unfortunately Claude is going to be taking the back burner for this chapter. That makes it a lot harder as I have to make it through the beginning section with only Byleth. While Byleth did get surrounded, thankfully she didn't take that much damage. It was more of an annoyance than anything considering I'm not able to one-shot anything due to my comparatively low speed. That basically means I'm not able to 2-round any of these enemies, which really sucks. The chapter starts getting easier to manage, however, once my other units start coming back. Hilda and Leonie come from the bottom, clear out the enemies there, and move up to help Byleth clear out the remaining enemies, tickling her in the center. Lorenz and Ignace spawn up top and just keep working forward while dealing with a ton of annoying archers. Raphael, Marianne, and Lysithea spawn behind enemy lines. While Raphael does fine, the other two are showing those post-time skip signs of the enemies actually being able to do damage to my units, and my axe is having less than 50 hit in some circumstances, which is not fun to deal with. The enemies of this chapter also love poisoning my units, so that's fun. They're also starting to gambit my units a lot more, preventing me from moving as I please. To deal with the boss, Pilardo, I have to cut him off before he can escape. I send Byleth right down to where the boss is, and I send Hilda to block off his escape path on the right side. And thankfully this strategy works pretty well, and I'm able to clear out Chapter 13 by defeating Pilardo. Chapter 14, the Alliance Leader's Ambitions, was unfortunately not quite as forgiving to me. These post-time skip chapters always make me think more than I thought I should. The goal of this chapter is to rout, but to prevent enemies from going past my starting area as well. I had Ignace, Raphael, and Byleth on the left side of the map to deal with those enemies, and everyone else went center. I didn't have any issues until about midway through the chapter because of those goddamn dark mages. There were 2 dark mages that could basically one-round most of my team members, save Claude. I must have used Divine Pulse at least 3 times trying to figure out a decent strat for dealing with these guys, but eventually I just went in deep with Claude on one of them and somehow survived a turn, being able to deal with the second one on the following turn. The sheer volume of enemies made this harder, as I had to start prioritizing certain enemies due to the fact that I can't kill everyone in one turn. My lack of healing means that chip damage from enemies is going to really add up over time. There's a decent amount of enemy reinforcements, being 2 Falcon Knights every turn behind the boss, but this is rather manageable at least. My dumbass also didn't realize that if I fully escort the ally Swordmaster on the left, he would have set fire to the map, severely weakening all the enemy units around the middle. Hindsight's 2020, I guess. Anyways, the rest of the map isn't that bad, and I'm able to beat Randolph and clear Chapter 14. Before I jump into Chapter 15, Valley of Torment, there is a paralogue for me to deal with. Forgotten Hero is a paralogue focused on Marianne in the middle of a Fog of War forest, completely infested by black beasts. Marianne is split from the rest of the party, with the boss constantly chasing her down. The chapter ends when the boss is taken down, but my first priority is getting Marianne to safety. I split my forces in half, with one half going to rendezvous with Marianne, and the other to deal with as many beasts as possible. The one thing I didn't realize is the sheer volume of beasts this chapter has is insane. Thankfully, most only have 2 health bars, save the boss. The beasts don't hurt much, but their gambit style attacks are devastating, and these guys are also packing poison attacks. So I realize the war of attrition will only lead to me losing. With that in mind, I reunite with Marianne and focus my attention on the boss. After a while, the fog disappears, so it makes it easier for me to track down the boss. The boss was very strong, however, I made up for it with numbers, and I'm able to beat the paralog, and I move on to chapter 15. Oh boy, this goddamn chapter gives me some fucking problems every single time I play it. This is the singular Volcano-esque chapter of this run, and it's a lot more frustrating than it is difficult. There are 2 paths to take, so I split up my army relatively evenly, but that isn't anything new. Instead, on turn 6 we are put on an artificial timer in the form of Judith, who arrives as an ally. The problem is that in order to beat the chapter, Judith needs to stay alive. The obvious nature here is that the suicidal nature of green units in this game, so I have no choice but to push through the lava tiles that deal 10 damage per turn in order to protect Judith in time. I won't lie, this does take me a couple of attempts, as the boss Gwendol and his main forces seem to beeline it for Judith's throat. The silver lining of this chapter is that the enemies are all physical based enemies, so the only real challenge is the boss himself. While there are no enemy reinforcements on hard difficulty, which really makes planning out this chapter a lot easier, we also run into Ash from the Blue Lions, who isn't difficult at all. I take him down to vent my frustrations for my Blue Lions run I did. God damn lock touch. Honestly, my best friend for the past few chapters have been killer axes. Super clutch to get kills where I don't have enough might, because the Fortress Knight has an increased crit rate, so that makes my crit chances super high. Tack on the combat arts as well, and my crit chance on, say for example, Claude is literally 73%, and that's what I'm able to deal with the bulk of Gwendol's health. So what we learned here is who needs skill when you could just rely on luck. Yeah, don't use your braid, yeah. Gwendol goes down and I'm able to move on to chapter 16, but in between months, all I'm doing is grinding levels in free battles, and at this point my whole party is around level 40. I'm honestly still scared shitless of the final boss, as I always tend to underestimate them in every playthrough I have of this game, so that's why I'm treating this like a Pokemon game with the amount of grinding I'm doing. And again, that's going to be the general theme of the post-time skip as well, where I spend most of my time in those free battles to gain as much experience as humanly possible. Chapter 16, the Rosecolored River, is an easy chapter, but only if you're prepared for it. What I mean by this is one of the biggest threats to my team is the mini-boss Acheron, or I guess one of the 3 bosses Acheron, who will spawn as a reinforcement from the left side after turn 2, or when you get close enough to his spawn area. He's a level 34 Warlock, which is around 6 or so levels less than the rest of my team, but the Warlock class still hits very hard, so it's best not to get caught with your pants down. What I do is bring several units at the same time to deal with Acheron and his party as soon as possible. I get super unlucky, of course, and Acheron dodges 2 80% hit moves. So in an attempt to manipulate RNG, I Divine Pulse. It eventually works, but I had to waste all my units on Acheron, not the Paladin reinforcements, leaving me somewhat open. Thankfully they go down quickly, and that's one major threat dealt with. There are also 3 Fortress Knights that come from the player's starting position, but they are easy to deal with simply because my Fortress Knights are better than theirs. There's also a Ballista user, but he does literally 0 damage to all of my units, so you can literally ignore him. He's just an annoyance that takes up time. Once my units reach the middle of the map, there's a variety of enemies that make me have to use my noggin a bit. There are a couple of beasts who don't do much initial damage, but as I said earlier, they have their gambit moves and they also inflict poison. My team is built on getting in and out quickly, so a slow burn really hurts my units. Also, there are a few mages in the middle of the map behind the beasts, so I have to tread carefully around them as always. Ladislava is also hanging out around there, who isn't that strong, but in combination with the beasts and the mages, makes her more of an annoyance than anything. But she can be scary if ignored completely, so make sure you focus on taking her down. Speaking of threats, at the end of this area is Ferdinand, who is insanely strong, and only a few of my units can tank his hits. In this situation, I use Raphael to bait him out, and I'm able to surround him with my other units. The end of this chapter is easy, as the boss was technically those 3 mini-bosses earlier, which were Acheron, Ladislava, and Ferdinand. All my guys have to do is take care of a paladin at the end of the map, and that's it with chapter 16. Before I can make my way into chapter 17, I have a fucking doozy of a chapter. It's a paralog that I'm tackling only because it gave me the option, but boy do I wish I didn't. The Sleeping Sand Legend is a desert chapter with a giant mythical beast in the middle named Macule. I think that's right, I'm gonna go with that. Who's one of the 4 saint beasts. It's Claude's paralogue and very straightforward at first. There are some beast worms to take care of and other enemies including thieves that have items to steal or take, so prioritize taking care of those guys first. Once the major enemies have been dealt with, the last thing is the boss. Macule is literally impossible for this challenge. His main form of attacking is a long-range gale magic, so quite possibly the worst thing for my team to try and deal with. He can one-shot everyone save Claude and Byleth, but they would die on the retaliation hit, and even pure waters and other items did not have any effect for me. So I decided to give in and just move on to the next chapter. It's a good thing that this isn't a required chapter, so thank God. I'm glad I saved right before I went into it, so instead I just ended up tackling some free battles in preparation for Chapter 17, Blood of the Eagle and Lion. Chapter 17 is the exact same map as Chapter 7 was, but there's one glaring difference. That being said, this chapter is super difficult if you don't know what you're doing. Like Chapter 7, there's a 3-way battle between houses. On my first attempt, I decided to do what I did in Chapter 7, which is split up my units and rush to gain a position in the middle where Bernadetta lurks. The problem is, the named enemy units pack a punch here, like Felix and Petra, holding extremely powerful swords. My attempt to deal with both sides at once completely failed, mainly due to Felix's insane sword stats dwarfing my own. So I Divine Pulse back to the beginning, and I use a different strategy. This time I funnel all my units to the right side of the middle platform. This means I only have a few enemies to deal with at first, like Hubert and a beast. They really ramped up the difficulty on this chapter, because at this point, the only units I feel that could 1v1 any of these named units are Claude and Byleth. My new strategy here is to play the waiting game. At the point where my units are at, I'm able to sneak up the side of the map slowly while Edelgard and Dimitri's forces destroy each other. I'm able to deal with Edelgard with a hit from Byleth and a lucky crit from Ignace, and now all I have to do to beat the chapter is defeat Dimitri. That means I don't have to deal with Dedu, Felix, or Ingrid, or anyone else who is near Dimitri. He gives me a tough time, but once again, the combination of Byleth and Ignace take down Dimitri, and I barely scrape by into Chapter 18, The Golden Scheme. Chapter 18 lets us take a step back from the insanity of the last chapter, and move on to a much easier chapter, albeit with a very interesting twist. Well, for one, the chapter is focused on the concept of stopping enemy reinforcements. The enemies will continuously spawn from the highlighted zones, and to stop the spawning, a unit needs to be placed on the highlighted area. My army spawns in the bottom right of the map, save for Claude. He is in the upper right, with the green unit army led by Nader. My plan for Claude is a simple one, just keep moving along the top of the map until he can eventually reach the top left of the map. Along the way, he runs into Lindhart, who thankfully is not that big of a threat, especially with the green unit aid, and goes down to a swing from Claude's steel axe. The rest of my units have a choice between 2 paths. I funnel the majority of my units into the left path, where they will run into a beast and a highlighted area. The constant reinforcements here are easy, as they are just inferior fortress knights. Beasts still don't pose any threat to me either. Byleth, Raphael, and Lysithea head right, where they deal with a beast and several assassins. No one is a threat here either. In the middle of the map lurks the Death Knight, and there are 2 ways to beat this chapter. You could take the long route, which involves cutting off all reinforcements, or you could deal with the Death Knight. The latter is much easier, however he decides to flee the map after a few turns, so in response I send Claude up to cut off his exit, and this is where my scummy side comes out. I can't kill him in 1 turn, and he will prioritize escaping over fighting, so I attempt to RNG manipulate using Divine Pulses to land a crit. This is the second time I have mentioned RNG manips, so let me briefly explain for the uninformed. All I am doing is changing the order in which Claude will attack to give me a different outcome if I don't score a crit. For example, if I miss the crit, I would Divine Pulse and let another unit take its action first before trying again. This is the TLDR version of RNG manipulation, and it's worked for me in this situation pretty well. I took out the Death Knight, getting another Dark Seal, and skipping the rest of the map, including a fight with Casper, who is hanging out in the back of the map, and several Dark Mages near him. With my scummy victory out of the way, I'm able to make my way into Chapter 19, the Chaos of War. Chapter 19 is a real fucking doozy. This is one of those chapters where range checking will become very important, but I'll get to that. First off is the layout of the map. My units are split up 6 to 3, with the majority of my units in the top. The other 3 are in the bottom right, and those are Leonie, Lorenz, and Lysithea. I didn't plan this at all, but having the 3 Ls in the corner is kind of funny. The job of the 3 Ls is to head down that narrow pathway in front of them, dealing with archers, grapplers, and wing beast reinforcements, while eventually crossing the bridge in the middle to meet up with the rest of my units. This works relatively well, with Lorenz being an MVP here. The enemies aren't too bad, but healing items are a must, and I almost got caught off guard, considering it's 3 versus a fair amount of powerful enemies. They don't do too much individually, but they will wear you down over time. The other 6 units' job is to reach the middle, while dealing with the Death Knight for what feels like the 100th time, a very scary Mage Ballista unit, and several regular enemies and beasts. The Death Knight is very powerful, but as I repeat what I did last chapter, I kind of RNG Manip and hit him with an 80% crit from Claude. This is enough to one-shot him. My strat with the Mage Ballista was to send in Raphael, who has enough health and strength to overcome the mage. The problem was I missed a 77 and Raphael died, so I had to Divine Pulse and RNG Manip again until I got the 77 hit in. Those are the initial issues dealt with. The other mages were a problem, but thankfully all my units in the middle were strong enough to 1v1 a mage. Sure, I used a lot of healing items, but it was worth it to stay alive. After converging all my units in the middle, my last threat was Hubert. Hubert is carrying a bolting tome, so I bait out his 2 shots with Byleth and give her a pure water to boost her resistance. I can now move up as he is out of boltings, but a few more mages are blocking my path. This is where checking my tiles came into fruition, because I could only let these mages attack separately. Thankfully, I pull off a crit with Claude and Hilda, and leave only Hilda in range, because I know she can take 1 hit at least. Once the mages are dealt with, Hubert himself, without a bolting tome, is at breeze. So I complete Chapter 19, and we are immediately thrusted into Chapter 20, conclusion of the Crossing Roads, without any breaks in between. So, just so you guys know, a quick anecdote about the map that I've been talking about is that I move my camera a lot, so whenever I'm referring to a position, it is the starting position of the map. So, as to, if you look it up on the wiki page or whatever, that's what you'll see on the wiki page. So, just to prevent any confusion, because people can move the camera whichever way they want, you know? Just thought I'd clear that up real quick. If Chapter 19 was a doozy, Chapter 20 is an absolute fucking nightmare. Possibly the hardest chapter of this game with the normal enemies alone. As the map opens up, we are immediately surrounded on all sides by enemies. Petra is in front, and Dorothea is behind. Both units are a huge threat to me, so I want to try and deal with them individually. First, I back up all my units slightly and check ranges so that only my strongest units will get attacked. Thankfully, Petra decides to miss with the gambit, leaving her vulnerable enough to kill next turn. I use Hilda and Lorenz to block off Dorothea's area as best as possible, so I can focus on the other enemies, of which is the first beast that poses some form of threat, the giant demonic beast on the right of the map. It has better stats than other beasts we've run into thus far, so I only feel comfortable baiting it out with Raphael and Claude. Once I bait it, it takes all my other units save Lorenz and Hilda to kill the beast, but it does go down after an onslaught of attacks. While this is happening, Hilda takes a gamble, and I kill Dorothea with an attack that only has a 49% accuracy. Normally I wouldn't even take such risks, but I literally had no choice as that was my only option in that situation. But thankfully Hilda pulled it off for me, and Dorothea goes down. With the initial right side, middle, and southern enemies dealt with, I attempt to ignore the left side and just go upward towards the boss area, where Edelgard is lurking. After a few turns, Dudu will appear from the top right as an ally, and he'll help clear up some enemies on that side. The left side has treasure chests, but I don't deem them worth going after, especially knowing what comes from that side, as it's mainly mages in that side. As we reach the top area, the first challenge is to avoid ranged magic ballista unit on the left, but honestly I didn't have a choice but to power through it, as its range was kind of insane. The mini bosses were hard, but honestly the hardest part of this map was dealing with a beast at the top while avoiding constantly respawning warlocks, flooding from the left. Any one of these enemies can either one-shot my units or get them severely low. My strat was to bring only the strongest units to the top initially, and once they bait out the magic attacks, I can retaliate on the next phase. It's a very retroactive strategy, but I want to play this as safe as possible with all these magic units around. Once they are dealt with, I can focus on the beast, regroup and heal a bit, and then make my way towards Edelgard. I leave a couple of my units like Lorenz to deal with a stream of reinforcements from the left, and Dedu stays on the right side to deal with those guys. Making my path clear, unlike the retroactive style of the chapter, Edelgard has to be taken out in a proactive manner. If I let her attack on her phase, my units would have died, so I needed to deal with her in one turn. Through a nice hand axe, the combined force of Byleth, Raphael, and Claude, and finally Hilda, were able to deal with the Flame Emperor and end the war. Not all is peachy though, as there are still 2 chapters left. With a small break to fix my inventory, I head into chapter 21, City Without Light. One thing I make sure a good amount of my units have before jumping into the chapter are some bolt axes. They are magic based axes, so units like Lysithea and Marianne will benefit from them immensely. They also have up to 3 range, making them the same range as a longbow, so that's also going to help a lot. It'll come in handy a lot late in the chapter, but as we enter the chapter, I already do an oopsie. Nothing major, just a bit of a time loss. My units are split up into 4 groups, with Ignace being by himself. I try and reunite one corner with the other, but I end up going in the wrong direction to where the doors in the center are supposed to be, and I end up having to go all the way around for each of my units. But when my units finally reach that middle area, the real map begins. First up are the Titaness, which are giant mechanical golem looking creatures with high defense and high crit chance. They're basically just more powerful beasts. This is the one place that my bolt axe idea is helpful, as they seem to have less resistance than defense, so I capitalize on that fact. The next problem here is the Vixom, which are map-wide towers that shoot lightning, and the only way to turn them off is to take over a control room in the far south of the map. This, however, is something I didn't do, probably because I forgot about the room, to be frank. I clear the enemies out on the outside of the center. I clear the enemies around the outside of the center, and thankfully they're not too bad. The second hardest part of the map would be when I reach that center area. There's a named unit, a paladin named Shylon, or Chilon, whatever. He would be okay to deal with if he was in range of my units, but no. He has a higher movement, which made him a problem. Plus I had Titaness, the Vixom, and other units to deal with all at once, including a Grimoire and a Dark Knight, both of which packed a punch. I was barely able to beat the Grimoire by using Bolt Axe 3 range, and Raphael clung to life with 2 HP after fighting the Dark Knight. I clear up the initial enemies of the area, but be warned, enemy reinforcements, including more Titaness, will be moving in on your units. So the last thing we have to do is open that middle door and deal with the hardest part of the map, Thales. When the door is opened, out pops Thales and 4 other units. 1 Mortar Savant, 2 Dark Bishops, and 1 more War Master. Including Thales, that's 4 units that can completely annihilate my units. So I immediately know I have to block off the path that makes sure only 1 unit can get attacked at a time. I use Byleth for this, and it takes more time than I'm willing to admit to figure out the right strategy. Let's just say I was down to very few Divine Pulses by the end. While this is all happening, I send Raphael, Leonie, Lorenz, and Ignace down to try and deal with the reinforcing Titanesses. After dealing with the mob small fry, albeit carefully, now it's Thales' turn. Thales has a Quake Tome, which is a very interesting tome because it was only ever used in Tearing Saga. But anyway, this tome deals damage to all party members severely, and some of them it even kills, so I have to prevent him firing that off at all costs. The other problem here is his other spell, Death, does 52 damage to Byleth, which is almost lethal for her. I had an idea I wanted to try here to see if it would work, and I am pleased to announce it did. I decided to put Byleth at full health next to Thales, while having a killer axe equipped. Instead of attacking with Death, Thales decides to use a Gambit, and misses as it only has 40 hit. I think the AI here did not want to take the odds with a crit and played it safe, which ended up actually being a fatal error here. That meant the next turn I was able to range attack with Byleth with a short axe and finish Thales off with Claude with a silver axe. It was a surprisingly simple solution, what seemed like an impossible situation to overcome, and finally now we just have one final chapter left. Chapter 22, Fodlan's New Dawn, is the endgame here, and the map itself is not too bad. Nemesis is a different beast however, but we'll get to that. The objective of the map is to deal with Nemesis' 10 elites, all of which are named units. It's disappointing that they don't have unique models, but oh well. They are all different classes that have legendary weapons for their class. So as it's the last chapter, bring out the best weapons that you have and just bring everything out of the convoy, because there's no point in leaving it in there, because it's the last chapter. I give my 2 legendary axes to Claude and Byleth. These elites are fucking scary and very, very hard hitters, but they are not anything I can't take down with my own hard hitters. The elites average around level 45 on hard mode, which is slightly below my units, ranging from 45 to about 49. I will warn you, I'm going to be naming all of the elites, and if I butcher their names, I am sorry. The first 2 elites are Goneril, a grappler, and Blade, a Dark Knight. They almost kill Raphael, but I get a lucky dodge and take care of them next turn. There's one positive about this map though, is that the mobs themselves are not that difficult to deal with. It does make me slightly disappointed that they're not harder, however, I will take my W's where I can get them. Next up is the Holy Knight Daphno, who gets completely obliterated by Raphael's Brave Axe in the middle area. Be warned that the middle area has a swamp-like thing that will deal 7 damage to your units each turn that a unit is in that swamp. Thankfully, there are heal tiles scattered around on all of these little islands that you should take full advantage of. Raphael tanks another elite's hit, this time being the Mortal Savant Charon. Claude finishes off Charon with a crit, and we move on over to the other side. Hilda and Lysithea take out the Great Knight Gautier. On the same turn, Byleth absolutely demolishes the weak Bishop Gloucester. After that, Byleth takes out Dominic, the Wyvern Lord, while Hilda baits out the Gremory Lamine's Bolting and takes her out next turn. Very few elites are left now, and this is where I realized in hindsight I messed up. So I actually didn't deal with Odess, the Dark Bishop. The problem here is that he, every 3rd turn, infinitely spawns winged beasts. That meant that Raphael, Lorenz, and Ignace were stuck dealing with those guys indefinitely. All I can say is, oops, my bad. I had no idea that he spawned those in. I honestly had no idea I left an elite also, until the very end of the chapter. Now, whether that made an impact on the difficulty of Nemesis, I may never know. Well, I mean, some of you might know, but who knows. Anyways, the Falcon Knight, Fraldarius, put up a good fight, but fell to Ignace and Claude, who were on the ballista to help out a bit. That's kind of where a loophole gets in, because it's not technically like a weapon class. I can kind of use the ballistas, because Ignace and Claude have some stats in archery. So, you know what, loophole, we're using it. Regan, the Bow Knight, fell to Marianne and Leonie's combined might. Now, obviously, besides my mess up, all that's left is Nemesis himself. He far out levels my team at this point, being a staggering level 60. I try an absolute fuck ton of strategies against this behemoth of a boss, but my only units that can do anything to him are Claude, Byleth, and Hilda. Everyone else is 0, so 107 HP will be a struggle for me to tear through. I try several times to RNG Manip for crits, but nothing ever worked for me, so I use my last resort. I've been saving all of my stat increasing items in the game, hoping I didn't have to use them. Well, I got proven wrong, so I pumped everything I had into Byleth and Claude. And to win, here's what I did. I'm going to give you guys the play-by-play right now, alright? First, I take off 22 HP with Byleth's Killer Axe while using Smash, bringing him down to 85. Claude comes in on the opposite side and scores a crit for 69 with the Axe of Yukon Savara, bringing him to 16 health. On the tile Nemesis is standing on, he recovers 65 HP. Now, I know it's possible to move him off this tile, but at the time I did not know that and thought he was stuck there. But hindsight's a powerful tool. Anyways, he ends his phase with 60 HP, but then tragedy strikes. During this boss fight, I actually did end up sending Lorenz to deal with Odess, but he got killed and I'm in way too much of a good position to reset. So unfortunately, I end up sacrificing Lorenz for the greater good. Rest in peace, you pompous fuck. Anyways, Byleth brings him down to 35, and I use Marianne to shove Byleth out of the way so Hilda can come in and do a bit of damage, bringing Nemesis down to range so that I can finally take him out with a very, very weary, by this time, Claude, and beat the goddamn game finally. This chapter deceived the fuck out of me with how much the boss outranks his minions. But whatever, we won in the end, which is the main thing here. The whole challenge was a lot harder for me, post-time skip part, but still very fun and enjoyable overall. I would definitely recommend this to anyone. It was so simple, yet so complex in decision making. Thank you guys so much for watching. I have been Meteor Kaiser, and as always, until the next time, peace.